So in my last video, I discussed 3 different transfer quarterbacks that were going to make a huge impact on wherever they went. The first guy I want to talk about is KJ Jefferson. Jefferson was a highly rated 4-star quarterback coming out of high school who was rated as the number 5 dual-threat quarterback in the class of 2019. He would commit to Arkansas and Chad Morris. In his first 2 years, he would sit on the bench and switch coaches as Morris was fired, and in came Sam Pittman. In his second year, though, he did manage to start one game late in the season, which he looked incredible, threw for 3 touchdowns and had 2 rushing touchdowns, and showed what he was made of. In 2021, he'd take over as the full-time starter and would throw for 21 touchdowns with just 4 interceptions and 6 rushing touchdowns. He'd actually have a great game on the road against number 2 defending national champions Alabama, where he'd throw for 3 touchdowns and 300 yards, and they'd almost upset the number 2 ranked Tide. He also led Arkansas to a 9-win season that year, which was their best since 2012, almost 10 years. Then 2022, he'd throw for 24 touchdowns with just 3 interceptions and 9 rushing touchdowns overall. He was viewed as the next Cam Newton. In 2023, he would take a step back, however. Although he'd throw for over 2,000 yards again, he'd throw for only 19 touchdowns with 8 picks and 2 rushing touchdowns. Sure, those stats are pretty good for the most part, but were still not as great as what he had seen the 2 years previous. He would decide to enter his name in the transfer portal, and at first we all thought that he'd commit to an SEC school. However, he surprisingly decided to commit to UCF and Gus Malzahn. This does make some sense, as Gus Malzahn has been known to develop quarterbacks, and this is both a huge pickup for him and UCF. Will Rogers was a 3-star quarterback coming out of the class of 2020 and was the number 29 pro-style quarterback in the country. He decided to commit to Mike Leach in Mississippi State and would end up earning the starting job. In 2020, he'd struggle in his first 3 games, but would then get it together and look completely different for the rest of the season. He'd throw for over 2,000 yards with 11 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Sure, those stats do not look good at all, but still, if you take away those first 3 games, those stats look a lot different. And it would show, as in 2021, he'd throw for over 4,000 yards with 36 touchdowns and just 9 interceptions. And then 2022, he'd throw for over 3,000 yards with 35 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He'd also lead Mississippi State to their best season since 2017, as they'd win 9 games in 2022. However, after the end of the regular season, head coach Mike Leach would tragically pass away, and Zach Arnett would not only take over for the interim in the bowl game, but would also take over as the head coach for 2023. This greatly hurt Rogers and Mississippi State, as they'd go 5-7, and Rogers would only throw for a little over 1,000 yards with 12 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Sure, those stats aren't bad, and it was in fact enough to make him Mississippi State's all-time passing leader. But still, it was nothing in comparison to the 2 years previous, and it was still the least amount of yards he had thrown for in a season. After the end of the season, Zach Arnett was fired, and of course, Mississippi State would have to look for a new head coach. Rogers, not wanting to play for his 3rd head coach while at MSU, decided to enter the transfer portal. He would decide to flip to Washington and Kalen DeBoer, who had just went undefeated and made the national championship game. However, DeBoer would leave for Alabama, and at first Rogers entered his name in the portal again, but would take his name back out and decide to stick it with the Huskies. DJ Uiagalelei was a 5-star quarterback coming out of the state of California and would commit to the Clemson Tigers. He redshirted his first year there, but when starting quarterback Trevor Lawrence went out with COVID, he'd actually start for 2 games as he'd throw for 300 yards and 2 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown over Boston College. Then would throw for 400 yards with 2 touchdowns and a rushing touchdown on the road against number 4 Notre Dame. He would finish the year with 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, and 4 rushing touchdowns, and was viewed as the future for Clemson football and the next elite Clemson quarterback, as he had looked elite in those 2 games he started in. However, in 2021, that would not happen. After he hadn't thrown an interception in 2020, he threw his first in the season opener against Georgia, which was a pick 6, and would probably have one of the most disappointing seasons of any hyped-up quarterback in 2021, as he threw for only 9 touchdowns with 10 interceptions. However, in 2022, for a while it looked like he had bounced back, as he had started the season with 14 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions, and looked like a completely different quarterback and more like what we saw his first year. But unfortunately, a few bad games late in the season, like when he threw 2 interceptions against Syracuse, which caused him to get pulled, and did not play well, and a blowout loss to Notre Dame, and also had a loss at home to South Carolina. Early in the ACC championship game against North Carolina, after 2 bad drives from DJ, they finally decided to bench him. Despite this though, weirdly enough, DJ would still finish with over 2,000 yards, 22 touchdowns, and just 7 interceptions. He decided to transfer to Oregon State and Jonathan Smith. He had a major comeback in 2023 and helped lead Oregon State to a very good 8-4 regular season record, and again threw for over 2,000 yards with 21 touchdowns and just 7 interceptions. Yes, that's technically 1 touchdown less than he had thrown for the year before at Clemson, but he looked a lot more consistent and he looked a lot more legitimate. He played a lot better against good teams as opposed to how he played at Clemson. However, unfortunately, with all this conference realignment stuff, Jonathan Smith would leave Oregon State to take the Michigan State head coaching job. And of course, DJ would enter the portal and have to find a new home. DJ would decide to go back to the ACC as he would commit to Florida State. He will actually have to go up against his old team in Clemson next year, which should be really interesting to watch. Either way, this is a big pickup for Florida State. I've heard many people criticize this, which I really don't understand, as like I said, DJ is now a completely different quarterback than where he was back in 2021 at Clemson. He is definitely someone that will be interesting to watch. Riley Leonard was a 3-star quarterback who was the 58th quarterback in the country in the class of 2021. He committed to David Cutcliffe and Duke and would sit on the bench his freshman year. Unfortunately, after the 2021 season, David Cutcliffe would get fired, and in came Texas A&M defense coordinator Mike Elko, who just made the decision to start Leonard. Leonard would have a breakout year in his first year as the starter, as he'd throw for 2,937 yards and would throw for 20 touchdowns with just 6 interceptions. He'd also have 13 rushing touchdowns on the ground. He'd actually helped lead Duke to a great 9-win season, which was unexpected. 2023 was supposed to be a big year for him. However, things did not go as planned. Although he'd start out the year pretty strong, he'd get injured midway through the season, which both hurt him and Duke. And he'd only throw for over 1,102 yards with 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions and 4 rushing touchdowns. Unfortunately for Leonard, his head coach, Mike Elko, would leave Duke to take the Texas A&M head coaching job, and Leonard would decide to enter his name in the portal and find a new school. He'd decide to transfer to Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman. Although I definitely think this is a good pickup, my only question is how will he translate from the ACC now to playing with Big Ten teams? Even though Notre Dame is not in the Big Ten, they play against a ton of Big Ten teams. Aiden Chiles was originally a 4-star quarterback coming out of high school and was the number 7 quarterback in America and the 58th player overall. He committed to Oregon State and head coach Jonathan Smith. Unfortunately, he lost a quarterback battle for the starting job with DJ Uiagalelei, who was a transfer from Clemson, who we just talked about earlier, but would still play in several games and looked great when he did. He threw for 4 touchdowns with 3 rushing touchdowns and no interceptions. Of course, Jonathan Smith would leave to take the Michigan State head coaching job, and even though he couldn't get DJ to come with him, he was able to get Chiles. This is a huge pickup for Michigan State, and I think Chiles is going to have a great career with the Spartans. But that's all for this video. Please tell me some more players that I should do. Please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends.